Steve Bentley here, Off-Road Grind, and we're gonna change some front inner CV boots. These little guys right there. Hopefully you can see that. This is a super simple, easy way. We're gonna leave the housing in your front diff. We're gonna leave the axle in your wheel. You're not gonna have to mess around with that 35 millimeter socket that you need to get that axle out of the wheel. You're just gonna pull that CV axle out of the housing, clean it up, put the boot on, put it back together, stick it back in. It's gonna be easy. You're gonna love it. Stay tuned. Hey, Steve Bentley here, Off-Road Grind, and we're going to be changing some CV boots today. I've done this in the past. Actually, I got this 4Runner about a year ago, and right away one of the first things I noticed was the CV boots were ripped. First of all, on the driver's side, you need to have a slide hammer for 4th gen, like mine, 07, V6. I don't have a slide hammer. So I ended up not being able to get this housing out here from the front differential. I drained the fluid. I just don't feel like doing all that work again. But what I didn't do properly is tighten up the clamps. And so this is the driver's side. I've just finished doing this one. I'm going to show you how to easily replace the boot without taking everything out of your truck. And it's really not complicated. So I'm going to show you that. I left the housing in place so I didn't have to drain the differential fluid. I just pulled the axle out, popped it down here, and supported it so I didn't mess up the outer CV part of the axle. And then just slid the boot off. There it is there. And took the tripod off, cleaned it, cleaned inside the housing, and put the boot back on, put a new boot back on, packed it with grease, slid it back into place. So simple. And then put the clamps back on. So if you think your CV axles are actually in okay shape, it's just your boot's torn, this is going to be a pretty simple way of showing you how to replace those so that you don't have to go through the big hassle. I'm going to go over the process on the passenger side, show you how that works. And basically we're going to undo the tie rod so we can pull the wheel mechanism out and undo these 2 bolts down here on the lower control arm that hold the ball joint onto the hub wheel assembly. That's going to allow us to pull this whole thing out, you'll see. And then I'm just going to get busy working on the boot. I'm going to pull it out over here because the shock's in the way. I'm just going to work on it here and you'll see how simple it is. So if you've got torn boots and you really don't want to go through the whole process of taking the axle right out, if you think it's okay, then this is a good alternative. If it isn't okay and you take it out and you start cleaning it up and you're like, oh, this thing's a mess, well then you can always pull the hub off and do what you need to do there. But this actually isn't that complicated, so let's get at it. Okay, so we're going to pop off the tie rod. That'll allow us to swing the hub out, and then we're also going to want to take out these 2 bolts down here that hold on the lower ball joint assembly. That'll allow us to pull things out of the way. I'm going to pop the castle nut back on as we pop the tie rod off. I'm going to leave this on for now until we crank off these bottom bolts here, because otherwise the whole thing will spin around. Okay, so once we've got the tie rod loose, I just put the castle nut back on there so I don't lose it. These big bolts go into the bottom of the alternate assembly. And then this whole thing here can now just slide out. So I'm going to support the wheel assembly. I'm just going to tie it up to the upper control arm here so it doesn't drop down. Once I cut that boot off, it's going to come out a bit more. Let's get some heavy gauge wire on there, and then I just hook it up to the upper control arm and then around one of the wheel studs. And now I'm set with that. So the next step is we're going to, I don't know if you can see that, hopefully you can. We're going to cut the bands here for the boot. Let's get some heavy duty pliers. You don't have to cut the boot off because you're just going to slide it off. There. Go. There we go. There's two. So yeah, that was my problem. I didn't put these on tight enough. I didn't have a crimper like that, so $14 on Amazon. Then I found I had one at home anyway. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to mark the top of the axle so I know how I want this to go back in. This is not likely going to turn as I'm working on this, but what will turn is this housing. So I'm just going to mark the top of that too. It's in alignment with the axle that I just marked. So the other thing that you're going to want to mark is the triangle. I'll show you that when we get that out of the housing there. And this is great because now you don't have to mess around with replacing differential fluid if you didn't need to do that. If you do, then hey, go ahead and drain your fluid and get everything else done at that time. But I just did that last year, so I'm not in a rush to do it again. Okay. I'm just going to pull this out. Pull the whole thing out and swing it around. There we go. And there's the triangle that we're going to want to fix up. Okay, so we're just going to go in here. We're going to take this triangle off later, so we're going to, there's a little C-clip on there, but what we do need to do is get in here to the housing, clean all that out, make sure it's not grooved or wrecked or anything, but really it's just getting a cloth and digging around in there. You can see how it turns pretty easily, so you want it to mark the top of that. And I'm just going to use up a bunch of rags and clean all the old oil or grease out of that sucker. See, that's from the other side. And I'm just going to work on cleaning that out, and then I'll come back when we're ready to pop the triangle off. Okay, here is the cleaned housing. So you can see it's wiped it out as good as I could, and then hit a little bit of brake cleaner in there just to get all the residual junk out. And again, in the triangle, you want to make sure you maintain the position on that, because I want to keep everything going back in exactly the same way. I need these little guys, what are they, C-clip removers or whatever. That's right where I want to lay down. I drop the crease. So I'm going to come in from the other side, and it'll give me better access to that triangle. And now we're just going to slide this whole assembly off. I'm going to keep track of what the triangle is on the top, And there's also a serial number stamped on the end of the rod, I'll show you. And you want to just reference that and just keep an eye on which triangle you're putting back on in the right spot. Here's the you can see the serial number here on the end. So the top of the CV axle that I marked is here. So I want to make sure I get this tripod over the 30A on the end of this thing. And there is a C-clip in here somewhere. There it is. And you're not reusing this clip because the boot kits have a clip in it. Huh. There we go. Now, my triangle is just sliding right off easily. Hopefully yours does as well. If it doesn't, you might need to convince it a little bit, which is a little harder when it's in the wheel assembly there, but hopefully yours just slides off as well. So I'm holding this, so that's at the top, and I'm going to put that back over the 308. And I should probably not jack around with this while my hands are full. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to clean this off, clean all these little splines out, and now I'm going to go over to the bench and clean this with some brake cleaner, wipe out as much of the crud as I possibly can, and then we're going to come back and reinstall it. We're almost done. Reboot. And the clips and grease are all in here, and clamps. So what we're going to do now is just clean out this triangle. There's the top. Came in like this. So I'm going to keep that up and in the same direction so I can remember where it is. I just got some brake cleaner in here. Try and cut through some of that grease. Wipe it off as much as I can. So basically I'm just going to go through this, clean all this junk out from the front and back and all the splines in there, and then we're ready to put it back in. But I'll just work on this for a bit and I'll be back in. So here's the triangle all cleaned up. So that's the top part that needs to go back on this way. So I kept that oriented properly. And we just want to make sure everything's moving smoothly. Right, you got all the junk out of there. And then just inspect it, make sure there's no groove or wear marks on there. I'm guessing that's what you don't want to see. So yeah, this looks good. I anticipated it would because I just changed it out a little while ago for the boot. So these are going to go back on. Now, some key things here. You want to make sure you put the boot back on first, because you don't want to put this back on and then realize you need to put the boot on. That would totally be something I would do. But I'm going to go clean that shaft. Let's actually take some of these. Couple of dirty rags here. Clean this up. Not much to this, it's just CV axle. So I'm going to be making sure I keep it oriented, although it's not likely to turn too easily. And then clean out all the splines here. Let's get my thumbnail in there. I guess you could hit it with some brake cleaner if you want. Really clean it out. But that's pretty good. Clean out that groove that C-ring is gonna, the clip is gonna go into. Here we go. So that looks good. So let's get that boot on there. And so these guys, these round sections here go on a particular area of the housing. You can see that round section here goes onto the indented section of the housing there. So you want to line that up on the axle as best you can so you don't have to spin it. So the top is there. So this is going to be directly over to the side. So there we go. And you can see there's a collar on here for the clamp, and that just snaps right into place. So I'm going to put the clamp on now, so I don't forget. And these pop open, so you don't have to put them on before the boot goes on. You just have these little tabs here, just squeeze it, and it'll pop open. And I just push this in as tight on there as I can. And then when you get the crimper on there, it'll do the rest. There we go. Make sure that's in the right spot. And then this just goes on the around that clamp. Just hold that top part in. Make sure that's set nicely. So this is what it looks like when it's done. So it's all squeezed in. And now we're going to work on the replacing the tripod. Once I get the tripod back in there, I'm going to squeeze the grease into the housing and then push the whole thing into there. If I put it on here, there's a chance the grease is going to come out here. So I'm going to put this almost back into position, squeeze the grease in, and then pop this boot onto the housing. The boot kit comes with another ring clip that you can use for the end of the CV axle that goes into the front differential, so I'm not using that. But there's the clip. Let's get around the other side with the triangle. So we're going to orient the top tripod with the marks on the spindle here. It's pretty good. It should slide right off, yeah. So get this clip in place. Sweet. Always easier when you have right to it. That's solid. Okay. So that's good. Now we just got to pop the grease in there and put the other clamp on, and we're done. So it's pretty thick, the grease, so it's not likely that it's going to come pouring out on you if you push it into that housing. show you that. So grease is in there, it's the whole pack. Now I've got the housing moved a little. So there's the top mark that I put on earlier. You can see that right here. And I've got the axle lined up so that the boot, that section there is going to slide right onto that. In theory. So pull this out, slide that in. In. Let's just hold that wheel assembly in. So fortunately that grease is pretty thick, so it's not likely going to slide out on you. And it's just manipulating this boot over the little ridges there. There we go. So that feels like it's on. Just going to take a look at it from underneath, make sure the boot is properly seated, and then I can get this clamp on. And there's lots of room under there to do it from underneath. Oh yeah, pretty good. Same thing here, we got these little grippers, and pop those off. So just making sure the band is seated properly on the boot. And get these little guys as tight as you can. Maybe one more. There we go. So there we go. So that's it. That's solid. And that seems to be working great. So here we go. Thanks for checking that out.